discussion, Heather has implemented a interactive component to this panel. So you will all have to work together in some capacity. And without further ado, I will hand things over to Heather. But thank you so much and welcome the panel.
Thanks so much. We're really excited to be here today and talk about not all of the disruptions in peer review, but at least some of them. But we have a very knowledgeable group on the panel today. Kicking off will be Jessica Polka. She's the executive director of ASAP Bio. Second will be David Meller, who's the director of policy initiatives for the Center for Open Science. And batting cleanup will be Damian Pattinson, who's the VP of Publishing Innovations at Research Square. So as Sophie mentioned, because we do have a lot of time today, I want to tell you a little bit about the format. We will have the three speakers giving some slides and talking about the initiatives that they've been involved with and that they're thinking about towards the future. And then we'll take some questions that are specifically for them on their remarks. And then I'm hoping that we'll have then the second 45 minutes of the session to do an interactive activity. So thank you to those of you out there who've agreed to take a card to participate in the activity. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to that point. I also want to welcome in the participation of our virtual attendees. When we get to the interactive session, you can put ideas that you have that are in support of some of the topics or against some of the topics into the chat, and that information will be shared with attendees here in the room. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jessica to kick us off and go for it.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thanks to all of you for being here. So I am very excited to talk a little bit about ASAP Bio's interest in trying to promote changes in peer review through both enhancing transparency and portability. So first, a little bit about our organization. We're a very small nonprofit that started got organized around 2015. At the time, I was a postdoc in cell synthetic biology. And we organized a meeting in early 2016 to discuss the role that preprints could play in life science publishing from the perspective of trying to promote cultural and policy change. And since that time, we have also begun exploring how we can increase the speed and the transparency and promote innovation in publishing through peer review as well. So this image is actually from a meeting that we held last year together with HHMI and Wellcome. One of the major focuses of which was about the publication of peer review reports, which is a phenomenon that we're very excited to see grow over time. And in fact, I think that it is, as Rachel mentioned, a time of change in publishing earlier today. And these changing practices are very exciting in the sense that they are revealing the incredible editorial work that is being done in peer review and giving authors more choices about how their work is going to be reviewed. However, changing peer review policies are often not necessarily clear to either authors or readers. So this is a poster that myself and a group of people who are organizing a project called Transpose, which is a database of journal policies, have put together as part of a landscape study. Authors include Tony Ross-Hallauer, Sam Hindle, Gary McDowell, and Naomi Penfold, also at ASAP Bio. But basically, we went through highly cited journals in Google Scholar and looked at their websites and determined the peer review policies that we could discern just upon what is said on the site. And we found a lot of uncertainty and a lot of lack of clarity. So for example, these are, again, the top 20 cited journals in Google Scholar in a variety of different disciplines, as well as overall. And the black bars indicate here where we are unsure from reading the website what type of peer review is this. Excuse me, this is a typo here, or maybe it's a Thinko with branded. is blinded. So basically, the light green is double blind, the sort of sea green is single blind, and the purple is not blinded. And then those journals which appear here in gray perhaps offer authors, for example, a choice or have some other model. But I think what's really interesting is that I think that an argument can be made that people within a certain discipline have expectations about what kind of review they're going to experience at a particular journal. But especially as research becomes more interdisciplinary, as members of a more general reading public are encountering these articles, I think it's very important, especially in an age of preprints, to highlight the work that's actually being done during peer review so that readers can understand what is actually going on. So in an effort to try to increase this transparency, again, Transpose, which is this sort of multi-organization, kind of grassroots organization to try to promote transparency in journal policies surrounding peer review, open peer review, co-reviewing, and detailed preprinting policies. So things like the media coverage policy of preprints, the licensing of preprints. We have launched a website where users can browse policies of now over 3,000 journals, or about 3,000 journals. So these records can be contributed by members of the community, or they can be verified, in which case they appear with a little check mark to show that a representative from that journal has vouched for the information being displayed. And Transpose also offers the opportunity to compare side by side the policies of different journals in different areas. So for example, what kind of aspects of the peer review process are open? Are the reports open? Are the identities open? Is this mandatory or optional? And how does that journal compare against other preprint policies as well? So I think this is really helpful, especially for people looking at an overall journal who might be considering submitting to a journal. But I think that ultimately what might be great for readers is to have a window into this peer review process. I think that there's a lot of discussion now about, especially as preprints are growing, how do we make it clear to readers what to expect when they're looking at an article? Many preprint servers contain a little message at the top that says, this article is not peer-reviewed. However, relatively few journals have a similar banner at the top that says, this article has been peer-reviewed. And, relevant metadata, for example, how many peer reviewers, how many rounds of review, what aspects of the article were reviewed, are not necessarily something that is really obvious just by looking at an article. I think one exception is that there are several publishers who are making it very obvious when there are peer review reports for readers to look at. So for example, Copernicus, EMBO, BMC, and F1000 all have various different symbols to denote that there are peer review reports that people can look at. And of course, I think peer review reports provide maybe the clearest window into what has happened during the peer review process, but that's not to say that other forms of metadata can't also be extremely helpful. Tony Rostalauer and I have been talking with Amy Brand quite a bit. She was one of the co-leads of the Peer Review Transparency Project, and we're looking to carry this work forward at the Knowledge Futures Group. But effectively, this was a workshop held in early 2018, which proposed a common sort of set of symbols and descriptors for peer review that can be combined to create a sort of visual language of what happened in a peer review process that's applicable not only to journals, but also to books as well. And there's a fantastic report from that workshop that you can read online. However, in addition to just making peer review more transparent, we're also interested in making it more portable. So I think many in this room are going to be familiar with these numbers from AJE, estimating 15 million hours wasted per year on peer review of rejected manuscripts. And, especially as it becomes more and more difficult to find reviewers, this is a precious resource that should hopefully be captured and used in some way. And from the perspective not only of editors, but also authors, while perhaps the majority of authors this is biomedical journals, data from biomedical journals, submissions are, perhaps one submission is sufficient. There is sort of this tail of articles that require subsequent submissions to different journals. And certainly cascade systems within a single publisher can capture the peer reviews that have come from a rejected article, but they do restrict the choices of authors, and it's difficult for smaller publishers, I think, to participate in a system like that. And of course, there have been lots of great initiatives, both past and present, to address this issue of portability. So, for example, Rubric by Research Square and Axios Review were journal-independent peer review services, as is Peerage of Science. And the Neuroscience Peer Review Consortium basically collects commitments to share peer reviews. And on the technical side, MECA is creating a format by which they can be transferred. But I think that we are very excited to early this week announce a new platform in this space called Review Commons. It is a collaboration between ASAP Bio and EMBO. And in addition to my colleagues Ron and Naomi at ASAP Bio, I also want to acknowledge Tomas Sumberger, Bernd, and Maria at EMBO for really bringing this project to life. And I just want to acknowledge our funders, also the Helmsley Trust, which are supporting this in a evaluation period. And it is a free service that effectively provides benefits to authors, reviewers, readers, and we believe journals. So we have just announced on Monday with 17 affiliate journals across 6 different publishers. This is providing, the affiliate journals are listed here, and a lot of them are focusing in the areas of sort of cell biology. We have a variety of journals from Company Biologist, PLOS, EMBO, as well as eLife, JCB, and MBOC. And it will be led by a dedicated managing editor who will manage the peer review process that is going to be quite similar to a very traditional journal peer review process. And it will transfer these manuscripts to affiliate journals along with the names of reviewers who can otherwise have their comments, who can otherwise remain anonymous when comments can be posted to bioRxiv. So let me just point out that at reviewcommons.org, you can sign up for the mailing list and follow on Twitter as well. So I mentioned bioRxiv. Review Commons is one of the projects that will be taking advantage of bioRxiv's new TRIP project. This is an integration with Hypothesis that permits partners to post the content of reviews alongside bioRxiv articles. And effectively, there will be a notification that there is a review, and this will help authors to discover this content, which is curated by these various journals and platforms. And so I think it's really exciting to be a part of this group, which also includes the EMBO journals and eLife and Peerage of Science as well, because each one of them is taking a different approach to exactly what they're posting, when they're posting, et cetera. So it'll be great to see that. So, as I mentioned, Review Commons does have this integration with bioRxiv, with the ability to send manuscripts bidirectionally there. There's an API integration with Hypothesis, and for those journals, the affiliate journals that are not using eJournal Press, reviews will be transferred by MECA. So I think that there have been amazing path-breaking efforts in this space. But I think that that Review Commons offers not only something a little different in terms of the disciplinary scope, but also some features that we think really take advantage of the current developments in not only preprinting, but an appetite for transparency. So, of course, EMBO is a very well-known nonprofit publisher. We have some great affiliations with community journals in a disciplinary scope. We're offering a familiar workflow for authors, reviewers, and editors, in the sense that the review process is going to be very traditional, I think, for people who might be used to submitting to these journals. And the system is scalable in the sense that the gate, in other words, to submission is going to be selective. So review comments authors will need to submit. Review comments will not be able to review every article that is submitted. But we hope that this will ensure a positive experience for reviewers. There's this integration with bioRxiv, which I think takes advantage of an interest in preprints. And we both organizations, ASAP Bio and EMBO, we're both very committed to transparency. And affiliates have agreed that we will release, in aggregate, statistics and survey responses about the performance of the platform after a one-year trial period. So, we really want the entire community to be able to learn from whatever we find through this experiment. And finally, just to close, I just want to mention that this is just one of many exciting trials and experiments in peer review. We also, ASAP Bio, also have a website called Reimagine Review, where we are presenting a directory of peer review platforms and experiments within journals that are trying new workflows and new processes for peer review. And we hope that this can act as a way to nucleate conversations and build connections among all of these innovators across different sectors. So with that, I want to thank my colleagues at ASAP Bio, at EMBO, and elsewhere, and just point out that these slides are available at the link on the screen. Do you want to do questions now or after?
We'll do questions.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much.
Otherwise, I'm going to fling it around. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Meller. I'm from the Center for Open Science. If you haven't heard of us, we are an organization, a nonprofit organization located in Charlottesville, Virginia, with a mission to increase trust and credibility in scientific research via transparency. And we do that through three main activities. We have a meta-science branch that evaluates barriers to reproducibility by going out and trying to replicate or evaluate the current published literature. So we have ongoing projects to replicate findings in social sciences, in psychology, and in cancer biology. Lessons learned from those reproducibility projects inform our advocacy work to publishers, to journals, to academic institutions and funders to incorporate more transparency and rigor in all the pressure points or incentive points in academic scholarship, getting funded, getting published, and getting hired. And then we build infrastructure to enable the types of actions for which we advocate. So more collaboration, more data sharing, more pre-registration is enabled on the platforms that we support and develop and maintain. Today I'm going to be talking about the rich report format and how the preprint community is getting on board and modifying various workflows in order to enable these types of activities. So the typical science project that you can learn from any introductory textbook is this basic hypothesis testing workflow where a new idea is generated, the research question design influences the design and the conduct of that study, which is then used to collect data with a specific analytical technique, which is then interpreted, published, and hopefully new ideas can come from that in a virtuous cycle. And this is the textbook idea. The vast majority of empirical scientific research follows the assumptions of this very basic model, uses tools that assume this model was applied. But we, of course, know that most science does not actually occur this way. It's a lot messier, even though it relies on the assumptions, even though a lot of the tools that are being used rely on the assumptions that are given in this model. But it breaks down in many different ways as the messy process of generating knowledge takes place. And so I'm not going to define all these traits, but suffice to say that a lot of studies are pilot studies that are just looking to test out an idea initially to see if it's feasible. There's a variety of ways to analyze data and to look for something that is statistically significant. It's easy to convince oneself that the presented evidence was indeed predicted ahead of time, so creating a hypothesis after you actually see the way that the data lay out, and the well-known effect of publication bias, where we are, as individual authors, very much more excited to go get something published if it's statistically significant, and reviewers, of course, reinforce that. And all of these sort of break down the assumptions that this model of scientific discovery assumes to be true. So that comes down to problems when you have a combination of several factors. So we have that strong bias towards statistically significant findings. Novelty is something that we are all excited about. It's a very basic cognitive bias of our that's shared by every person, that when something looks unexpected or novel or unexpected or looks like a new discovery, that's much more exciting to us than a sort of a boring old confirmation or a null result where we didn't see anything supposedly significant. So we're much more enamored by those types of findings. Combined with a flexible way to analyze data so that if you use the well-known adage, if you torture data long enough, it'll tell you the story you want to hear. That has been borne out in many examples of taking one single data set, giving it to 30 different analysts, and you get 30 different answers, even though they're striving towards the same question. And by chance alone, a couple of those are going to seem more surprising or newsworthy or exciting than others. The combination of those leads to irreproducible and biased research and a body of literature that's not representative of how the universe actually works. So how to change this? There are a lot of ways to change this process. I'm going to talk specifically about registered reports, but all the initiatives that we advocate for have one underlying meaning, which is to recognize and reward and give additional credit to transparent research processes. And the reason that is important is because if the underlying messy work is going to be subject to additional scrutiny, that's a direct incentive to make sure that those underlying evidence gathering processes are as conducted as rigorously as possible. Status quo is that just the tip of the iceberg of the evidence ever gets subject to scrutiny, and that's not the way that evidence should be evaluated. So one of the big initiatives is a badging program to signal and reward and give additional credit to individual studies that have additional elements of it made transparently available. If the data set is available, if the research materials are available in a repository, that should be a very clear indicator on the journal and table of contents. If the work was pre-registered with a pre-specified analysis plan, that should be indicated. And those can be implemented without mandates. Mandates are really hard for a journal to implement. There's going to be a lot of pushback or a lot of uncertainty about how that's done. Funders or universities could also be hesitant to put out mandates like that because they're hard to enforce. But just giving additional recognition and credit could be sufficient to showing how norms change over time. When you browse a table of contents, you just see how much more transparent practices are taking place. And then you feel like, oh, well, maybe I should be doing this too. But enough about that. I want to get back into registered reports, a two-stage peer review model where publication decisions are made without the biases of knowing how the results turn out. And so the stage one peer review process takes part during the design phase of the research project. And that's subject to peer review. The questions are being evaluated. Are these hypotheses interesting or well-founded or important? Are the methods proposed feasible and are they appropriate for the design at hand? Is it a well-powered study? And have the authors, this is the most important criteria, the bottom one, Are there sufficient quality control checks to make sure that the results are interpretable no matter the outcome? One of the biggest concerns about evaluating research before you know the results is how do you know that's going to be done in a competent way? Well, those rules can and should be and are established ahead of time in this model. The research is conducted, written up, results are provided, and that second stage of peer review only evaluates whether or not the authors followed the approved protocol that was offered by the journal, did those quality control steps succeed, and are the conclusions justified by the data. But very importantly, things about whether or not the hypothesis was supported, whether results are impactful or novel or statistically significant, those things don't matter at that second stage of peer review. So this has been around for a few years now, and it's been adopted by about 207 journals, and we have a running database of articles that are using this, that are starting to use this format. It occurs in multiple disciplines. It's taking off most quickly in the human and behavioral sciences and psychological sciences, and neuroscience in particular is picking up on it quite a bit, but it's applicable to any hypothesis testing empirical research practice. And there's a lot of early evidence coming out, a lot of interest in how this format is whether or not it's having the intended effects. Anytime disruptive things happen, there's always a question: what are the unintended consequences? What are the effects of this process? And so there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in the scientific community about what types of evidence is coming out this way. There's a lot of interest in by publishers and journals. How will this affect readership, citation counts of these articles? We haven't seen evidence yet of the originally published ones that they're being cited any less than the average citation count for the journals. A couple of different metrics show it higher, but that's very preliminary. We tend to see that that one of the main outcome measures, the publication of null results, is indeed occurring as expected with this format. So the latest twist on this format is to add the preprint community into the mix. So PCI is the peer community that Corinna Logan and colleagues have been running for a couple of years now. And it's a preprint recommendation platform to give recognition and feedback on various preprints and various preprint platforms. And it's a free and transparent platform for giving a recommendation to a preprint. So here's an example of one of the recommendations. The workflow is that a preprint is either submitted or identified by the community, and then it's reviewed, and those reviews are available on the platform. And if the reviewers, if the commenters come back with a recommendation, then it shows up on the platform saying, oh, this is recommended and here's the feedback that we've provided to this platform, or to this article, to this preprint. And that can be used or modified to be incorporated into this register report process. So the workflow for that is to first, just like in a typical register report, submit a proposed research plan, in this case a pre-registration, to that PCI community. Just like the reviewers can comment on a completed study, they can comment on that proposed study, give feedback, give recommendations, say this is a stupid question that nobody should be answering, or this is a great question, you should modify it in this way, make sure that you account for these variables, et cetera, et cetera. It should go at least under one round of revision. Oftentimes there'll be 2 or perhaps even 3 before the methodology is solidified enough so that it can be given what we call that in-principle acceptance, EPA. Sort of a green light to go ahead. If it's conducted in this way, it'll give a fair test to the questions at hand. Not the final, but the next version of the preprint is then, comes back weeks, months, years later, once the study is completed, and the next version are those results. Again, those are also subject to another round or multiple rounds of review, just to make sure that the study was conducted as specified and that those positive controls were followed. The format is agnostic to platform, and so we've seen these be picked up on bioRxiv, It's appropriate for those coming on preprint platforms supported by the OSF. Zenodo is a platform that can hold either these proposed or these final studies. And the one at the top is a GitHub repository that's been given a DOI for persistence. So it's a good way to merge the benefits of a couple of different platforms there. So with that, I will say thank you and take questions at the end. Yes. No, I'll take no questions.
Okay, so I'm Damien Patterson. I'm from Research Square, and I'm going to be talking about a project we've been doing in collaboration with Biomed Central called In Review. So BMC have been doing In Review for years. One of the reasons it's been so great to work with them is that they have really championed open peer review. They have pushed it out to a lot of their journals with a great deal of success. Here's an example of a paper that has review reports. You can see both on the original submissions. Do I have a cursor? Oh yeah, no. Yes, there we go. I might not use it though. It's a bit intrusive, isn't it? Okay, so you can see that there are review reports that are shown on all versions of the manuscript, and if you scroll back through the version history, you can see what has changed. So that's a really a sort of hugely useful thing for a reader to find out the kind of scrutiny that a paper has gone through and the kinds of things that have changed during the version. I think you can be much more confident in results of papers that have been through open peer review. But we feel it can be more open. I think there are various things that could improve that process further and make you even more confident about the process and about the actual rigor of the final results. So one of those is that the review could be available as soon as the paper is submitted. So at the moment, you only get reviews posted on the final published version. So there's a lot of other versions. But what you don't see is the paper as soon as it's submitted to the journal and the process that goes on. So you don't get the real time, which is important as well, that you can actually see the evolution of a paper and discover it more quickly. What's also missing from existing open peer review models is that you don't see any of the editorial work that goes on in addition. So essentially all you see are the review reports. You might get the editor's decision letter, but you don't see all the rigorous checks that are done by the journal. And I felt for a long time that journals are sort of selling themselves short by not showing more of their working. So essentially, if you're doing very rigorous checks for say, ethical approval or for reproducibility, those are not being shown to the readers at the end of the process. They have no sense of what has actually been looked for. Figure manipulation, for example, that's something that a lot of journals look at, but we don't actually see that on the end, the final published version. And community commenting, as any part of a sort of open system, you would want to open it up to other people. And I think the biggest change that we could do to really open up the peer review process is to bring more people in. So there are all the things that we have been focusing on improving as part of the work that we've been doing with BMC. And this is the result. So I wrote this in a different system. So the badges are arrows aren't quite as clear, but hopefully you can see them. Essentially, this is the platform that we have built, the Research Square platform. There are a few things that I want to point out. So starting at the top, the journal and status. So first thing is that you can see which journal the manuscript has been sent to, and you can see what the status of it is. So here the paper is under revision, but it could also be under review, or it could be newly accepted or so on. Secondly, you can see these editorial badges. So as I said, the purpose of these is to actually open up the editorial checks that go on a manuscript. So if you hover over this badge, I should point out, I know Rachel talked about all of these things earlier, so I'm sort of going over them, but hopefully in a bit more detail. So if you hover over the integrity check, you can see actually the sorts of things. This is a summary. We have a much more detailed list, but there's a summary here of the sorts of things that have been checked for this manuscript. So for example, plagiarism, we can actually say this manuscript has been checked and cleared for plagiarism. There is hypothesis annotation at the side. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. There is the full version history, so you can see the versions updated as they come in, and this full peer review timeline. Now, this is the thing that I really want to focus attention on, because essentially what this is a real-time timeline that updates every time a review is invited, every time a reviewer accepts, every time a reviewer submits their review. So essentially, the process is shown in real time, and readers can actually see exactly where it is on the in the process. In addition, this is really opening up the kind of black box that authors complain about so often, that essentially, at the moment, you send a paper to a journal and you hear nothing back for a long time, and then eventually you get a decision letter. What we're doing here is giving them incredible levels of granularity into the actual the process of the peer review and exactly where their paper is. So they can see reviews as they come in, and actually have much more kind of granular information about what's going on their manuscript. As I said previously, the hypothesis integration is important to us. We essentially have two ways of commenting on the platform in order to try and encourage people to comment beyond the traditional peer review features. So on the right there, you can see examples of these are actual comments posted by researchers on papers that were posted to InReview. And you can see that they are detailed. As with any commenting system, this is the kind of, this isn't the norm. Most papers don't have much commenting, but the ones that do have got quite a rich discussion going on them, which is really great to see. What's important to say is that those comments are sent to the editor. So essentially, because this is all happening before the editorial decision has been made, readers are actually able to really engage in the review itself and actually potentially influence the decision. It is up to the editor what they choose to do with those papers, and of course they are still inviting their own referees. But this kind of allows for a lot more people to comment on the paper and potentially enrich that review. The other way they can comment is through hypothesis, and that's inline annotation. So essentially, you can, as a reader, you can either highlight text and make comments on specific points, or you can actually just do a full review at the end. And as I said, it all gets sort of bundled and sent to the editor at the point of decision making, so that they can hopefully use it in their decision. Here's a comment from a researcher who used InReview. It's a revolutionary platform. As a researcher, I love the comments for the community, and I see InReview as more than a platform for sharing research, but learning how to make it better through community comments. So to us, this is really important. Community commenting is a really important way in which you can improve manuscripts whilst they are still in a state to be improved. Most journals have commenting systems, but we know that they don't really get used. And I think a big reason they're not used is because the commenters know that they can't influence the paper in any way. It's already been published, the author is moving on, so there isn't that incentive for them to actually pay attention to the comments. There is a private author dashboard that is only available to the author, and that's what this looks like. Now, it has a few features that I just wanted to quickly mention. That was meant to be this page scrolling up. It didn't work at all. It worked better in the Google Slides that I rated in. But anyway, so if you scroll down, you can actually see these comments as they come in. So again, you get live feedback on your paper as it's posted, rather than having to wait for a final decision. You have a suggest reviewers functionality, which allows authors to actually make their own suggestions for reviewers. Papers often get stuck, as we all know. The reviewers, for whatever reason, aren't interested in picking it up. They sit for a long time. This actually gives the author control to actually say, well, look, I can see nothing's happening. I'm going to actually make some recommendations myself. Really try to sort of drive the process forward. And finally, there are these improve your manuscript features. Now, this is the work that we do as Research Square. Research Square is essentially a services company. The main thing we do is offer editorial and kind of author services, including language editing, as Rachel said, but also a lot of editorial checks. I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. But essentially, the idea is that authors are actually able to kind of receive feedback and improvements from the manuscript through our editorial services team. One other thing I just wanted to say, so if the paper gets accepted, then this is how it looks. We mark it up very clearly so that the reader is directed to the final published article. We don't publish the final version of Record, only the accepted version. So the kind of final copy edited and marked up version is only available on the journal site. as I said, it's very clear that that's what happened. I think this is a question asked earlier, what happens if the paper's rejected? And you can see that here. Essentially, we remove the journal status. Instead, it revokes to this Research Square preprint, and it looks like any other preprint that's submitted. I should point out this paper wasn't actually rejected. This was a direct submission to the platform. I didn't want to highlight any rejected paper, but essentially they go into the same pot as the preprints, and as a result, the authors are kind of slightly, feel safe that they don't just get exposed as being in a place where it was clearly rejected. So we've done some surveying of authors to see how they like peer review, how they like in reviews so far. I'm not sure how well you can read these, but the biggest one was to be better able to track the status of the manuscript. Now, this is really interesting. We have essentially done a kind of trade with the author where we say, we'll give you a much more transparent process and you can have more control, more transparency over the process. In return, you have to post it as a preprint. And so that's the kind of, and we can see that most people are interested in it because of the control and transparency, but the preprint, but they have to have it posted as a preprint. They can't get that privately. And as a result, that has driven a huge amount of uptake. We have, as Rachel said, I think 38% at the moment. It was higher. It's tipped down a little bit as we've grown. But we now have 56 journals on the platform. So we're posting several hundred papers a week to the platform through this pipeline. So uptake has been really extraordinarily high, much higher than we were expecting, which is great to see. So clearly, authors are willing to accept the preprinting in return for the extra information. Other feedback is that it allows them to gather the wider feedback from the community. That, to me, is something that I think we can push more, but that's good to see that has traction as well. And it allows people to use it as any other preprint through the usage on the publication itself. Very quickly, so essentially, do they think it helps? 56% say yes, somewhat. 30%, so nearly 90% of people think that this has been a beneficial process for them, which is again great to see. Very quickly, future developments. We want to kind of make these community comments a little bit more formal. We developed rubric. Independent peer review has been a big part of what we've done for a very long time. And essentially, we feel that the commenting that goes at the end of the papers is perhaps a little too informal for readers. The authors are used to a slightly more structured form of feedback. And so we're actually working on a kind of way in which you can submit open peer reviews using the rubric form to allow them to submit a more structured thing. And then we'll visualize that somehow to show issues with the paper. And finally, we're going to add some additional editorial services. This is happening this quarter. So as I said, at the moment, you can only do the integrity check, but Research Square also offers reproducibility checks. In fact, we do reproducibility checks for all the Nature journals at the moment. And so we're going to actually offer that directly to authors as a way in which you can improve your manuscript and the reporting of your manuscript to make sure that it meets the highest standards of reproducibility. And a statistical check where we actually send it out to statisticians to give feedback on the stats. And so you can actually certify your paper to say we have met the highest standards for reproducibility, the highest standards for statistics. And so together we have a kind of an entire kind of ecosystem in which authors can post, can improve, can get peer review in real time, and end up with an even better publication. So that's it, very briefly. This is the team. I don't normally do these slides, but I just wanted to point out this has been an amazing group, both within Research Square, also within Springer Nature, who have worked. And one thing I did want to say is that Rachel from Springer Nature liked it so much that she has actually moved over. So we're delighted to have her on board. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much to our three speakers. We do have now time for questions on any of the projects and topics that were raised by the speakers. I'm not sure if folks need to come to the mic or if Mary Beth's going to take it around. So I see someone in the back there.
Hi, my name is Swapna Padhe from Wiley, and this is a question for David Meller about the registered reports. So you talked about really a two-step review process, so I was wondering if you are getting complaints or any comments about, now, isn't this additional burden on the reviewers because you're essentially asking them to review twice, although maybe one step may not be as intensive as the next, but still you're asking them. And I'm assuming you're using the same set of reviewers?
It doesn't have to be, but the same set are invited for the second time. And early evidence suggests that they like it because they are able to give feedback and suggestions at the point in time in the research life cycle when it can actually make the difference. They're not performing a post-mortem about pointing out all the mistakes that were made. If only the authors had included this other covariate or accounted for X, then this would be a feasible study. But they're setting out from the beginning, this is what I would expect to see in order to be convinced by the evidence. If the authors can go out and do that, then I would be happy to do that. And that's based on a survey of some Wiley reviewers from the first set of journals at Wiley who have been involved with the register report process. So that's just some evidence that was actually just pre-printed last week that we're starting to see. And we've seen a lot of anecdotes of that, but this is the first attempt at a survey of that community.
Thank you. Hi, Chavi Chauhan, American Society for Investigative Pathology. My question is for Jessica, and it circles back to Rachel's talk this morning, too. So I'm trying to understand the impact of this change peer review system of pre-printing on performance matrices. So if an author is publishing something and submitting it to a preprint platform, they're going to get a DOI, which is wonderful because if the citations do happen, it'll improve their H score, H index, right? But as a researcher, I might be shy to cite something that has not been peer reviewed yet. So by not citing their publication, I am sort of adversely impacting their outreach. And from a journal's perspective, if a paper, an article, or some data are on a preprint server with a DOI which is not affiliated to a journal yet, and for example, the paper gets rejected, and it goes through the cascade or funneling, to multiple journals, and finally finds a home. But the impact factor for the journal will be calculated for 2 years for the length of the time the paper had been published with the journal. So the journal is losing out on the impact factor by taking something which has been in the pipeline for too long. So any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think that I would love to see all kind of bibliometric and indexing services modernized to include preprints and pool the citations that go to preprints with the final published article. So for example, Google Scholar is already doing this. It matches preprints, and it has been doing this since, for many years. For example, posting a paper on the archive, those papers appear as a previous version of the final published paper when they come out. And so then, in fact, the citations then pool and contribute together to the author's H index. To my knowledge, and please correct me, I'm not sure that Web of Science is actually tracking citations on preprints in this way, but I think that doing so would be a great benefit to journals, especially as preprints become more widespread in many different disciplines. Does that answer the question? Okay, yeah, okay.
It'll be good to know what are the journal's perspective on taking something or publishing something which has been in the pipeline for too long, or in the preprint study for too long.
Yeah, and the follow-up is about the journal's perspective.
Oh yeah. So the follow-up is, are journals losing out because the in other words, if they can't, they won't be getting the new citation. Like, even if the citations were counted, they would be, from 2 years ago, so before when the journal impact factor is calculated, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I feel like we have to go over this hurdle of actually calculating the journal impact factor on the preprints first. But, I think that, another thing to consider is, in addition to when the preprint appears, there is typically a delay into when it's cited and so forth. I think one thing that's really fabulous, Europe PubMed Central provides links bidirectionally between published articles and the preprints, and also citation graphs, so you can see the citation pattern. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is my personal feeling is that perhaps the impact factor could adapt to this new reality. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay.
Plus one.
Okay.
I have a question for Damien. I'm Ellen Fox from American Association of Immunologists, and I found the platform really fascinating, especially with the integration of the community comments. So at our journal, we spend not a lot of time, but we obviously, when assigning reviewers to manuscripts, we like to take in consideration institutional conflicts of interest, potential collaboration with authors. And my initial reaction is to have some concern when you take comments from a community and integrate them in the editorial decision. So my question is, have you given thought, or maybe you can elaborate on how you police that essentially? So how do you ensure that the community commenters are qualified to comment on the science, et cetera?
Yeah, so we police our comments in that we have a moderation functionality to ensure that they're all sort of, meet our standards. But we don't, essentially we just tell the editor that these comments have been received and to use them as they see fit. So yes, we do expect them to take them with a pinch of salt. They're not invited. And so, yeah, it's a really good point. The balance is between, reducing the barriers to commenting as much as possible. And so if you have we know from experience, if you have a lot of checks in order to get to a place where you can comment, then people just don't go through them. They just don't sign up. So we want to keep it as open as possible. But, there is, of course, that risk. And so we do, the editors do need to know that they are unsolicited. So, yeah.
I just have a follow-up for David on that point. For peer community and if you don't know, that's fine, I'm putting you on the spot. They must have set criteria for getting into the different disciplinary communities? And
yeah, I can't speak to that question precisely because I don't know the exact answer for it, but if I can sort of wax poetic, that I almost am a little bit less concerned about that than might be average, because these comments are readable. The editors can judge whether or not it makes sense, just like they can read any reviewer report. And if it's coming from an unqualified source, that will be immediately obvious. If it's coming from a sort of a non-traditional unqualified search, reading the comment will say, like, oh, well, yeah, I'll take that into account. That's a good point. Or this is internet garbage. We see a lot of comments on many different platforms, and it's pretty quick to see what's worth taking into account. And that's sort of what editors are great at doing.
great, other questions?
We have one here.
Oh, okay, then.
Hi, this is my question for Jessica about the review comments. I'm also part of peer review, and Rockefeller University Press has been very active in that sense with external transfers and internal MECA. But my question is, we try to work with reviewers to provide reviewer forms and try to help them make a call for a manuscript. Here is journal independent, right? So even before authors consider any journal, reviewers would have to make a call on a manuscript. So can you provide more details? So would that be based on which criteria, just solidity of the data or more? Because then different rules will apply to different journals. And then the second question is, since the authors will be the one choosing which journal to transfer these reports to, and we know the authors always love impact factor, so they will go, there is an inevitable trickle down. And so that, I don't see how that would save much time in peer review, because the authors will still go from one journal to another, yet with the same report. So we'll definitely spare the reviewers to a certain point, but The question is how we'll save time in peer review.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So to the first point, which is how do the reviewers react to these manuscripts? I think we believe that the lack of knowing which journal this, in other words, reviewing for no journal is actually a design feature in the sense that reviewers will likely focus more on more objective elements, including the sort of rigor of the science, the way that it's presented, how clear that is, and of course they can offer comments on how how interesting they think it is and how it fits into the overall literature. There's a wonderful comment from Vivian Siegel, who has been in an early startup process in several journals, and she's written that when a journal starts, in her opinion, as an editor, those comments were sometimes the most interesting, where the reviewers didn't really know they could just trash a paper on the basis of a low, not being impactful enough. So certainly it's an experiment. We're going to see how it goes and whether authors feel that the reviews are more constructive or more helpful. We're going to be surveying users of the platform for this information. And the second question about authors chasing impact factors. So authors will indeed be able to submit to different journals if the first journal rejects the paper. I think that my hope is that when authors read the comments of reviewers, they are better informed than perhaps a completely, going into the process blind, which journal that paper might be most likely suitable for. By giving authors also the opportunity to provide, and I did not mention this, a response to the reviewers. So authors will be able to respond. They'll have a relatively short window of time in which to prepare like perhaps a point-by-point response, maybe some changes to the text, so that the journal will be able, the editor of the journal will be able to see these responses as well. So my hope is that this process will be relatively quick. You make a very good point. And again, this is something where we have to see how author behavior pans out and whether this process does indeed save time, as we very much hope.
I just wanted to quickly add to the first question about agnostic peer review. So for my years at running PLOS ONE, we had a really hard time trying to persuade reviewers to only look at the soundness of the science, because they had heard of PLOS ONE and they sort of had an idea in their head of what it meant, and it was different for everyone. But that would always come across in the review. So we constantly see people saying this is fine but not suitable for PLOS ONE, and it's really, really hard to get anyone to think. To lose that mindset unless you basically remove it. So at Rubric, what we did, and actually what we still do with our sort of journal independent peer review, is to completely blind them to that information, and it does make a remarkable difference. They do genuinely, look at the paper objectively and only look at. They're actually much more positive. They're generally more constructive, and they have a higher acceptance rate, higher sort of. Request for revisions rather than rejection. So it's definitely a more positive process.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more question. Is that on?
Okay. Yes, my name is Tom Luik from Directive Open Access Journals. So what I want to ask Jessica and Damien is in how far are you considering also other languages than English? Because it's a big bias in all science, And I think Damien, you said there is some kind of tools that you offer for language editing, which is English probably. But are you considering to expand to Spanish for a start, or French, or whatever? And the same question for the peer review reports and everything for Jessica.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, a very important issue. I think that we are beginning with a very limited group of affiliate journals and a limited scope. And unfortunately, language is going to be is going to provide a restriction to authors. And I hope that that can be one of the areas that could be expanded upon by this or similar initiatives in the future. But for this initial period, we expect English submissions. But thank you for raising that important point.
Yeah, I'm afraid my answer is the same. We are focusing on English at the moment, but we do offer, we do have translation services. We do, Research Square has a very broad user base who are non-English speakers, and so it would be really nice to kind of serve them better, and I think that's, pretty useful feedback.
Okay, the moment maybe you've either been waiting for or dreading, depending upon whether you have a card or not. What we wanted to do was introduce some of the complexity around some of the topics that the speakers addressed through some back and forth exchanges, some point of view exchanges. So at the tail end of lunch, I did distribute some cards to some voluntolds, as I'm being suggested. And the way that's going to work is this. We'll introduce the topic. So for the first one, which is kind of an example topic we won't spend a lot of time discussing, but we can at the end if you like, is around peer review badges. So I would ask, I think there are 4 of you who have peer review badges as a topic, to come to the front. And Mary Beth, if we can have the extra microphone, that would be fantastic. They will read, they have point of view cards that correspond to author pro, author against, reader pro, reader against on the topic of peer review badges. I will say this does not necessarily reflect their own opinions nor their day jobs. They have kindly agreed to participate here. And then after they've gone, if the speakers on the panel or anyone in the audience wants to add to the conversation, and we have 2 additional topics beyond this. One is preprint, commenting on preprints, and then the last one is journal independent peer review. So we'll run through the example here so you can see how it works. I will ask author pro to speak.
Hi, I think that it's exciting and helpful to have a visual indication that my work and my article has met industry standards for peer review.
Awesome. Not everyone may agree. Author against.
These so-called badges are meaningless. There's no agreement on what they stand for.
Now, from a reader perspective, reader pro.
At a glance, I can tell what has been done in peer review for articles I'm reading.
Not everyone agrees.
I don't know what any of this means.
If we can have a nice round of applause for our voluntolds. So as I mentioned, that's really the example project, but a few of our speakers did mention badges in their presentations, so if they want to reflect upon that, I'll give them a brief chance to do that, or if they want to pass and go to the next project, we can go ahead and do that too, since we're starting a little late.
Well,
it doesn't have to be as dramatic a reading.
Trying to get my persona going. Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's a way to signal a little bit of additional transparency, and the real important part of behind it is that information is then verifiable by the community. One of the big things, whether it's signaling that these peer reviews are available or that data are available or whatever, it's not a given that it's better work, but it is more verifiable. And so more insight can be gained by then going behind the badge and seeing what's there.
And I want to say I really want to try to find a picture of a NASCAR that I could use with badges all over it, but I didn't have time to do that. So just imagine that. Yes. Do we have, we have the microphone. Who took the microphone from the, okay.
I really wanted to hide for this question, not walk to the front. There was another service that offered these peer review badges about 5 years ago, and I don't think it's around anymore. From a journal publishing perspective, I thought it was a great idea. I'm getting some puzzled looks. Peer review evaluation, abbreviation PRE. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, loved it, wanted to implement it for our journals. Our editors were a little bit embarrassed about revealing that much information. I think especially when reasons for a slow response were not clear. Some I think were very valid, and maybe others just embarrassing. So my question that I've been wondering this whole time, I think badges are great. What has your response been from journal editors? How are they feeling about this?
So To echo a talking point that was made a few minutes ago, that's a little bit of a feature, not a bug. The prospect of that information being revealed should give one pause and say, okay, if that information is going to be revealed, what do I want the world to know about this? And so the reason that transparency is a value of the scientific process is because trust is not a value of how scientific evidence should be evaluated. It's a nice value, but it doesn't. It's counter to the norms of how scientific discourse should happen by me simply saying, trust me, I know what I'm saying. Showing how long it was in peer review, showing what the reviews came back with, revealing the underlying data are a cause to give one pause. Sorry for the rhyme. But that pause is essential for increasing the quality of the work that's going on behind the scenes. And to echo another point that was on the same theme but unrelated, it comes down to a little bit of a collective action problem where it takes a lot of leaders in the field stepping into this together to say that we can do this together. We can all take one step forward at the same time so that no one entity is exposing themselves unnecessarily before the community is ready. And so that's where a lot of the efforts that are ongoing, that's where a lot of the efforts are focused, trying to get 10 players to take the step at the same time, just to show we're all revealing this information at the same time, we're all on the same page, and let's take one step together.
Yeah, I just want to say it's a two-way thing. Like, I think you're right. Journals are often a bit nervous about, showing what's under the hood. But I think, and there are reasons for that. There are sort of some embarrassing reviews. There are some embarrassing times, and we've all seen them. But at the same time, there's also a lot of really amazing work that gets done by journals that just isn't getting reflected. And I think, a lot of the research community just think that journals are literally, all we do is just receive a paper, send it to a peer reviewer, and then send it back and publish it, and that's it. And in fact, there's a huge amount that journals do, and I feel that is being lost because of the lack of transparency. So I think there is probably more to gain than even if it means showing some slightly embarrassing turnaround times.
Yeah, and that reminded me of one additional point. That's a really good point, that that transparency is beneficial in terms of all of what's going on behind the scenes is often lost on a lot of readers. And that's a value proposition that's hard to understand given the contentious discussions going around about publishing models. And that's, I think, an opportunity to show value add. And the other additional point is that there's a lot of evidence that just says if you make a mistake, the reputational benefits are gained, are increased, credibility is increased when those mistakes are aired and corrected, as opposed to this more contentious back and forth that often doesn't lead to better evidence.
Okay, I think we need to move on to our next one. I know there's still questions, but I think the speakers are going to be here all day. So the next group, if you have preprint commentary, can you please proceed to the front of the room? Because our other one was an example, we had only 4 perspectives, but for this one we have 8 perspectives. You can self-organize as long as you can manage the microphone. Janice says she's in charge, so. Okay, so many of our speakers did talk about preprints, and then there were many allusions to preprint commentary. So our first perspective is author pro.
I am more confident that I haven't missed anything because this work was subject to more scrutiny.
Should I say it again? Not everyone agrees. It's getting old now. Author con.
I'm worried that the editor won't allow publication if my paper is already published as preprint.
Good point. Reviewer pro.
Finally, I can get credit and recognition for my review. I put a lot of time in on these things, and it just isn't visible.
Thank you. Well, applause almost broke out over here. That's awesome. Reviewer Khan.
Does this even matter? Is anyone paying attention to this? I'd rather communicate my criticisms privately to the author. I don't want them to look bad and me to look like a jerk.
Reader Pro.
It's great to see the community feedback. I can learn more about the state of the art in the field. I can share my own expertise and thoughts with others, and I can better evaluate the quality of the work by seeing the criticisms that were leveled at it. And I can better trust the work by seeing that it was subject to diligent critique.
Reader Khan.
Great. Now I'm expected to read these comments too, as if I don't have enough on my plate.
Thank you. I'm sure the sentiment is widely held. Editor Pro.
With feedback on the preprint, I've got more information to select peer reviewers. I can share more information with my peer reviewers. I've got more information to base my decision on. The work that I publish is subject to more critique, which improves the reputation of my journal because it is subject to stricter expectations.
And obviously late to the party. Editor Khan.
So, if the review is happening on reprints, what is left for me?
That's a good point. Show our panelists, there's a lot to unpack there. Oh yeah, a round of applause. Thank you, gang of 8. Anyone?
The con point that I have the most sympathy for is the reviewer con. Criticizing one's work in a public venue is really tough, and there's no easy way about that. And it can be a very challenging thing to do, and there are very natural hurdles to doing that. So I don't know the best way around that, except that it is challenging, and it requires a lot of trust and goodwill that needs to exist as a precondition.
I also just want to comment, yeah, I agree, it's sort of a culture change that might need to happen in order to permit that kind of open conversation. I just want to speak to the last con point about what is left for a journal to do. I mean, that has also been a criticism levied against preprints. I mean, I think the work of journals is a composite of many important functions, and one of them that is very sorely needed is the curation of work for a specific audience. And so, I would say that in response to that last comment, I think that, even in some hypothetical world where journals were simply curating, that is in itself an extremely valuable function.
Yes, I know we had a question that came in from the virtual attendees. Is that, is it? Sorry to take the mic away from you, Sarah. It'll come back, I promise. We've got some virtual attendees who wanted to get in on this, and we certainly want them to.
Yes, thank you so much, Heather. Yes, I have a question here from Matt Hudson, and the question is specifically for Damien, but I'm sure it can be extended to the rest of the panel. His question is, there's an assumption here that readers want to see the reviewer comments so that they can use them to weigh the value of the paper. For example, this was an interesting paper, but can I trust it? How thorough was the review? It seems this used to be the role of the publisher or editor to essentially vouch for the results. Are we pushing this role to the reader? Or can you talk more about why reviews are important for the reader?
It's a good question.
Are we talking in the context of preprint commentary here, or are we talking in the context of...
Generally.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That is the challenge, and I think it's come up a few times. Angela said it this morning, that, at the moment there is this gatekeeper role, and that allows you to sort of have a kind of binary decision about whether either this is trustworthy or not. I mean, personally, I don't think that's great. I think often readers are, as well, if not better qualified to make a judgment on things. So, I'm sort of I don't have an answer. I guess I'm broadly in favour of it. I sort of more generally on the kind of preprint commenting thing. I remember, I think it was Pat Brown once said, if you're coming to a paper because you've searched for it, because it's because it's something you are specifically looking for, most likely you are better qualified to review it than someone who got sent it, by a journal editor who was. And I think that's really worth bearing in mind that the people who are actually spending their time looking for papers in exactly their field probably do have a better expertise, and that feedback should be at least included in a paper. So I don't think I quite answered Matt's question there. So I apologize.
Yeah, I just want to comment that, for myself, reviews are one of the first things that I look at because I think they provide such fascinating insight onto what the strengths of a paper are and what the kind of concerns and questions are. There's interesting data that I will tweet out with the hashtag of statistics of, from EMBO, the click-through rates, I think, are about 10%. I think there's an Elsevier trial where I think they saw about 30% of the ratios of viewers to the papers to the reports. So I think there is quite a significant amount of interest. I mean, you could make the argument, maybe, if you're looking just solely on views, then, supplemental information is not going to be as important as the paper, so why have it? But I think the point here is that this is a really important piece of transparency about why this work was considered to be distributed through this channel of a journal, and that, to Damien's point, that is, I don't think in this environment where there's a lot of peer review is obviously not done the same way at every journal that claims to do peer review. I think that there's not, and giving readers a window into that can allow people to really appreciate the quality of that process, regardless of whether they're familiar with the journal or not. So,
I'll give one genuine and then one smug response. So one of the most fascinating things that I've been reading these days, eLife is publishing the reviews that are coming out alongside the Reproducibility Project in Cancer Biology, so an attempt to replicate previously published preclinical cancer biology research. And the reviews coming back to that are really fascinating reads, as the reviewers, sometimes the original authors, 1 out of 5 reviewers per paper is asked to be the original reviewer. And they're really grappling with the really fundamental questions about why the project's being done and what the evidence is presenting. And so it's a really fascinating insight into the science of evaluating credibility. And then to get to the point of I think it was, I'm not going to say it, there was a journal that started using these peer review badges, the pre-badges, and 4 or 5 years ago, they published a paper that I strongly disagreed with, and it was one of the articles in the issue that had not undergone peer review, and so I had a moment of looking at the table of contents of the issue that had come out, and that had not been subject to peer review criticism, and it was just 5 folks' opinions, which were valid opinions, but had a lot of omissions in them. And so that was just a way to see insight into what was being published for what reasons. It was a fascinating thing to look into.
Follow up with him later at the drinks, and maybe he'll tell. Sarah?
My question was if you found that the comments we heard varied based on field, or if you have had much time to consider that. Yeah, I realize it's still a narrow slice of folks trying this.
I don't know. Probably, but I don't know.
It varies by career level, that anecdotally see. Early career researchers, grad students, and postdocs are more worried about making sure that they do a good job and have much more thorough comments. I've noticed that anecdotally. That's the one.
Yep. Sophie, another question from the cloud?
Yes, thank you. I have a question
crowd
here.
in the cloud.
From Patty Davis. She has a question for all of the presenters, and her question is, do any of you have impressions on what scholars who aren't in Western countries are thinking about preprints and open peer reviews? Are they participating by submitting and reviewing?
Yeah, we've seen really high uptake. It's not just Western countries that are submitting. Certainly for in review, the opt-in is very broad. It's been really interesting to see the diversity of subject areas. A lot of clinical papers that we weren't expecting. A lot of people from all different countries. A lot from China. So it is much more diverse than we're expecting. So yeah.
We host several preprint platforms. Some of them are regional specific, and a lot of the most activity is coming from the geographically distributed ones, the ones that are for specific geographic regions. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand to participate more widely in the scientific discourse.
Okay, I want to make sure that our last group of actors get to come up and do their slides, or do their cards. So the last topic, and if we have time at the end, we can come back to some general questions because I know we've had some more, is journal independent peer review, which I think at least a couple of our speakers touched upon here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Everyone's confessed to it. That's good. And do we have the microphone? Yes. You guys are ahead of me. Excellent. Our first stakeholder, Author Pro. Again, it's journal independent peer review. Author in favor.
I should be able to get my article peer reviewed, then take that peer review with me.
Short and sweet. Author against.
Look, peer review should not be a commodity service like copy editing. And please stop messing up my paper with copy editing also.
I told them they could embellish, so that's I deserve that. Reviewer Pro. And please let us know if you are an early career reviewer or a later in your career reviewer. Oh, look at the panic. Just read something on the card.
As a reviewer, I think this process is great. I won't have to review the same article over and over again for multiple journals, and maybe now I can finally get recognition for my peer review activities.
And just to add to that, because Jess helped with these cards and she had an excellent response from an early career reviewer, which is like, I'll finally get credit for my work and not just ghostwrite for my PI. So I just wanted to put that out there. Reviewer against.
This will disconnect me from editors at key journals, and this won't result in rigorous peer review.
Okay, Reader Pro. Somebody has it. Reader Pro.
I'm Editor Pro.
Somebody, is there a Reader against? All right, Editor Pro. I don't know, I'll find the Reader Pros. Go ahead, Editor Pro.
I can first focus on my search on articles that have already been peer reviewed, and this would help me with handling my continually grow of submissions.
Okay, Editor against.
So what you want to do now, you want to decouple the journal brand. I'm a society editor, and the society has cachet. A lot of authors publish with the society journal because of the society's name. So now you want to decouple. What value will my society and me as an editor of a society are you leaving me with? Wow. And then second,
it's almost as if she has her own opinion on this. Please continue.
And then second, to make matters worse, you're now going to dilute my reviewer pool. You're just going to take my reviewers away that are, belong with the journal community and a society community, and you want to offer them up for a bigger project. Are you crazy?
As a director, that's the kind of performance you dream of. And I realized I didn't have Reader Pro and Con. That was wrong. I have Publisher Pro and Con. So Publisher Pro, which may or may not be different than Editor Pro, but let's see.
If my editors can see independent peer review, that will speed up time to publication. And my staff will be spending less time on finding reviewers, leaving them with more time for other tasks.
And finally, Publisher Con.
Peer review should be anonymous, not community-driven or commoditized for credit.
It was really hard to follow Swapna, so a hand for all of our readers today. So, response from the panel.
Wow. I mean, that was an incredible performance. Thank you. I want to have a little more conversation about this idea of a specific pool of reviewers for a journal. I completely understand that, especially society journals have deep connections within their communities. However, individual scientists are reviewing for many different journals. So I think that there is inherently going to be some overlap in the reviewers that will be contacted for an article regardless of which journal it is submitted to. Now that said, I mean, I think that the idea that, reviewers and authors are going to different journals and sharing this experience together, I think there's more fluidity there than the current publishing environment provides.
I would just say that there is tremendous variation in let's just say reviewers, every one of these. Some reviewers love it, some reviewers hate it, some are really excited to get credit and show like where their comments are coming. Some are very hesitant and don't want to perhaps criticize publicly. And we see that my background's behavioral ecology, and I know that sort of variation is is necessary for a well-functioning ecosystem to see what sticks and to see what works and to sort of allow the individuals to try individual reviewers, individual journals and editors to try out models that are new and different and could be better, and if they don't work, it's fine. They can sort of revert to what they're more comfortable with. And the one additional point is that it feels really good to be invited to a review. It's sort of a mark that your opinion is valued, and so there are ways to do this to have one's cake and eat it too, to sort of invite and solicit reviewers saying your opinion is valued, and to invite that to be done in a public way or to not be done in a public way. And so these opt-in models are a good way to try out all the different variations we've been talking about today.
What's the opt-in model say? What's the opt-in model?
The opt-in model of, if you'd like to make this public, check this box.
We have a question in the back. Susan?
Thank you. So it's kind of a two-parter. I'm with the society, and we have reviewers that review for us and for our competition. And as a publisher, I don't want the reviews for a rejected article that we've looked at being given to our competition. So this really goes to the question of, and I don't know this answer, and I'm really curious to hear from everybody, who owns the review? Is there a copyright issue? Is there a license that provides for the distribution? That review came into our system that we've developed. We've reviewed it in either EJP or Scholar One, and now I don't want to share it, but who owns it? So that's
I'm pretty sure it's not you. I mean, it could be a number of people, but I don't think it's the publisher who owns the reviews. I think it's probably the reviewer. And so you're right. I mean, of course, that is the big... Well, because they didn't sign over any license agreement with you. There's no copyright transfer. So unless there is, I don't know what your journals are, but I'm pretty sure in most, you're right, it's a very woolly area, and it's always been a real blocker for all of these projects that have been talked about previously. Everyone says, are we even allowed to do this neuroscience consortium? And again, going back to PLOS, when we were trying to use, to share reviews, it got really thorny because no one is really clear on it. So I think it's it's a good question. It's one that we do need to clear up. But I think it needs to be a community effort. I don't think I guess I sort of not keen on the language of saying, we've done something and no one else has allowed it, because I think it's not particularly helpful for.
I definitely appreciate that an individual journal puts so much, editorial work into securing reviewers. But the reviewers themselves are spending many hours evaluating the manuscripts. The authors have spent, months in this process. So I would hope that there would be ways to basically to compensate and credit the entity that is performing this peer review if it is transferred in some future model to another journal. In this way, not only authors and reviewers could conserve that effort and energy, but also that work could be appreciated and compensated as well. And I'm curious whether does that play into your concerns, or is it more just the idea of allowing that to leave the bounds?
Can we get the microphone back to Susan? No, we have our virtual attendees. There's a limit to how far you can project.
That I can't do. It's a little bit of both. I mean, the scenario that's running through my head is I have a reviewer, I have an article that we reject and goes to a competitor. And the reviewer, the article is published in the competitor, and the review is made public. And the reviewer likes that their reviews are made public, but I don't make reviews public. Am I going to lose reviewers? I've spent a lot of effort and curation over the years acquiring them, teaching them, training them, and so forth. Yeah. It's a hypothetical, but I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. Oh, well, it sounds like a great opportunity to offer that, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and I think some reviewers do have a preference for that, but everybody is different. Yeah.
Anne, you have a follow-on?
Yeah.
Oh. Let's turn it on.
In a way, though, unfortunately, that's evolution. If your reviewers like that better and you don't do it, then you better do it or you lose reviewers. I mean, it's just math. So, I guess if there's new services and new things that are available that are attractive to the market, then we have to adapt to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier I cut off a question here from the center, so I want to give opportunity for the last word to come in. And so, Sophie, is there anything hanging online that could follow on? Okay. You have the last question.
Okay. My name is Alan Gadget. I'm with Adapon, and go figure, I have a technology question. So you talked a lot about, and Jessica, among others, about the visibility of the badging and the statistics around, how long it takes. So is there any thought to maybe quantifying by publisher, by journal, by reviewer, the amount of time that it takes for each step in this process, as well as if you can look at it across journals for different types of reviewers and use that for curation of the curation process itself?
Quick responses.
Yeah. It's a super interesting question. I think that time to review, while obviously something every author wants, is not necessarily the best thing for a review. I mean, you can imagine super fast peer review and as maybe even being a red flag because you really want that to be a thoughtful process. It's a really interesting question. I'm not as familiar with all the different services that are at play. Like, for example, I don't know whether Publons is doing something like that. Do any of you know? No.
Yeah, there's an optimal point, and if it's too short or too long, they're gonna be, it's a red flag of sorts. But just the more information out there, you could imagine new questions being asked and an ideal being reached for, but it'd be hard to give like a general recommendation of something to look for, what that should be.
Great, and I think we're coming up on time, and I want to thank our panelists one more time. And also our hardy volunteers. Thank you so much.
What's the process for that?
Thank you again to Heather and her wonderful panel. Thank you, Jessica, Damien, and David. That was a fantastic discussion. The hour and a half just flew by. Thank you all so much for the interactive component. I think it helps facilitate a lot of interesting conversations around peer review and disrupting those certain peer review models that are existing and future peer review models that may be contributing to our futures.